past 8 years, alcohol's played a massive part in my life. From bottles of Smirnoff at house parties to going out 2 or 3 times a week to traveling around the world half drunk. I don't think there's been a week in the last 8 years that I haven't had a beer in my hand. But in January, I decided enough was enough and I went cold turkey for 6 months. I'm going to explain exactly why, some of the shocking things that I learned along the way, as well as my relationship with alcohol now. Now, with that description of my alcoholic days, it might seem like I was a bit of an alcoholic, but you might not believe that I was actually a pretty serious sportsman when I was growing up. I played semi-professional rugby and also for my university first team. And in all honesty, people might want to hear this, but it was so fun while it was happening. I love going out with my mates on socials, and that didn't stop while I started traveling around the world. I went from New Zealand and drinking the beautiful Queenstown to making my way all the way up the East Coast, drinking schooner after schooner and absolutely loving life. And then I popped over to the lovely Bali, where the beer is the same price as water in England. I was still loving partying just as much as my uni days. But then something changed. I was on my own and I realized I needed to make friends. And the best way to go and make friends in a new country, I think, is by joining a sports club. So I looked far and wide and the best thing I could find was a run club. So I headed along to this run club. And because Bali is so hot, you have to get up about 5 in the morning to make these run clubs. And I met some amazing people at these run clubs and started hanging out with them more and more. So I was hanging out with my new friends, and after about a month, I realized that I'd not touched a sip of beer. And that was not because I'd made the choice not to, but it's because you have to go to bed at about 8 a.m. if you're gonna have any chance of getting up at 5 a.m. to make these run clubs. And the people I was hanging around with just were into their sports and exercise and exploring a lot more than going out partying. But that was the shocking thing, is I felt amazing. And I kept these friends and these sober habits for the next 5 months while I lived in Bali. On my way home, I spent 2 months in Cape Town, and I introduced myself to people as someone who didn't really drink when I was making friends there. And I quickly made the same new friends who weren't going out much and instead were going to run clubs and exercise classes and early morning swim. I got back to the UK after my 2 months in Cape Town, and I started just telling my friends that I'm gonna go sober for 6 months. Now you can imagine telling a load of rugby lads who had switched into the London corporate life that you weren't drinking, and you can guess what they would have said. I got loads of stick, but my newfound life was so great that I just didn't want to turn back. Although I'd had a beer or two while in South Africa and Bali, this time in London I was committing to 6 months, not a single drop of alcohol. And that brings me on to the shocking things that I learned having committed to 6 months of not drinking. Now there are 2 things that everyone really knows are going to get better if you stop drinking, and that's your money and your health. But I couldn't quite imagine the difference. In terms of money, I think I saved between £600 and £800 a month on alcohol. And that is not because I was spending that much on alcohol, but it's about the alcohol related expenses. See, when you go on a night out, you might only spend £50 on booze. You spend money on Ubers getting there, you spend money on your late night kebab, and you also probably get a takeaway the next day. When you've just started in London, that £600 to £800 is absolute gold dust. And then there was health, and people say you're gonna feel better. But as far as I'm convinced, giving up alcohol is the biggest competitive advantage that people are leaving on the table. I spent my uni life in and out of hospital, either because I was getting sick or I was doing stupid things while I was drunk that was injuring myself. When I say that I didn't get a single cough or cold or runny nose over the whole of the winter while I was giving up alcohol, I promise you that's true. When you're going out all the time, you just can't shake those runny noses, and the amount I felt better while I was not drinking is actually quite hard to put into words. Okay, so my money and my health improved, but one thing I was massively shocked by is how much extra time that I had. If you're stuck in a job that makes you snooze your alarm every single morning, then there was one reason why giving up alcohol is the best thing that you can do. See, when you're slogging it out in your job a week, it's so nice to wind down on a Friday evening with a few beers. You lie in on the Saturday morning because you're feeling a bit ropey, but you know you've got your mate's birthday in the evening, but you have no choice but to go and have a few Guinnesses to celebrate. You wake up on the Sunday, you start watching football hungover. Before you know it, the Sunday scaries are back and it's another weekend lost. Instead, by quitting alcohol, I suddenly have my Saturday and my Sunday mornings back. I can apply to 2 jobs and make a bit of content before my hungover friends had even woken up. Yes, I did miss out on the 4 a.m. benders, but I guess that was the price I was willing to pay to literally change the course of my life. I worked out that I'm gaining at least 3 hours a week, probably more like 5 or 6, by giving up alcohol and getting rid of those hangovers. This is literally the difference between you training for a marathon or not, or building a business on the side of your full-time job. If you love your life how it is, then fair play, but if you want to do something else, like start a side business or train for something, giving up alcohol is the single biggest thing that's going to give you the most amount of time to do that. While I guess a few of those things are obvious, I wanted to highlight the 2 things that you've probably come here to hear about. Am I going to be really boring? And how the hell am I going to date people? And yes, I completely agree. There's no way you can have a night out on the same level if you're drinking and not drinking. But I did have a few good boogies, and it also meant that I could wake up and have an extra plan in the morning. So while my friends were mirroring me till about midnight, I went to bed, had a coffee with someone else the next morning. Whereas, does anything really good happen past about 1 a.m? Another thing that I found is that sober nights are what you make of it. If you go into it with an attitude that you're gonna have an awful time and everyone's gonna be drunk, then you will have an awful time. But I found that if I went into it with maybe a Red Bull and I hyped myself up a little bit, then really you can use everyone else's drunkenness to just bring you along on the night. And you're probably wondering, how the hell did I date? But I actually found out something so interesting when I was dating sober. So when I used to go on dates and I was telling girls that I wasn't drinking, I found that some girls would react really badly and some girls would react really well. And what I realized is that the girls that reacted badly are not the girls that I want in my life anyway. And the girls that reacted well could see that I was trying to make a positive change in my life, and perhaps they could see in me that I was ambitious. So they saw parts of me that I wanted them to see. They're the sort of girls that I want in my life. So actually it turned out to be an amazing filter to actually work out the people that I wanted to be going on dates with. Yes, you might not be able to go on those nights out and have those fruitful one-night stands, but at the same time, you realize that the quality of your dating interactions improves so much. And you're probably thinking, what am I doing now? And actually a month ago, I had my first beer, not because I didn't want to give up the sober life, but because I wanted to give up the sober title. And I think there's a big difference, and let me explain. The sober life, as I've explained already, I absolutely loved. But the problem with the sober title is I found there were a few times where I was skipping out on the opportunity to have 1 or 2 beers that really would have added to the moment. There are a few times where I was sitting in beautiful landscapes or with some of my best mates, and I was thinking, there's no reason that I wouldn't have a beer. I quite like the taste of beer, and also the 1 or 2 pint buzz is quite a nice feeling. And really see the time, the health, and the financial benefits of that aren't bad at all. So I wanted to give myself the opportunity to be sober on my own terms, and I found that I've literally kept up the exact same habits and only had a pint every now and then when I'm feeling like it. I think this is a much more healthy way to have a relationship with alcohol in the long term, but in the short term, I do not regret the 6 months because it taught me exactly the benefits of what not drinking was going to give me. And I'm not trying to convince you to be sober, but the one thing that I would say is if you do, it will probably change your life.